Looks like there's just one. Okay, so welcome everybody to the Rabbi Seminar of 2025, and thank you for being here. And this is the fourth class out of 5. So we'll see the topic in a moment. I'd like to just begin with a little nigun, a little melody to help us put down whatever we were thinking of when we came in and just be here right now. So here's a little melody. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. So you can mute yourself and sing along if you want. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. So we're gonna share the PowerPoint, and you can unmute. You feel free to unmute yourself now. So this is my favorite bird, the great blue heron, right near my house, in the creek near my house. And this is Jews in Search of God in the Modern World. Oh, okay, Seaside Jewish. I like your text here. Sorry about that. And our session today is religious. Oh, did I put session 3? It should be, I think we're up to session 4. 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
My mistake. I'll fix that later. Session 4, because we had an introduction, and this is kind of the third type of theology we're talking about. So pretend that's a 4, and that is a bald eagle at Bombay Hook this spring. And let's say the blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Holy One, a blessing. Your presence fills creation. You made us holy with mitzvot and bid us to engage with words of Torah. Okay. So just to recap, first we had an introductory session. That was the first one. It's kind of like, in Israel or in Europe when the first floor, the ground floor is not the first floor, and the first floor is like one floor up. That's why I got confused. Okay, but basically we saw that in modern times, especially with as the late great Rabbi Neil Gilman said, there's 3 basic approaches to our Jewish theology: rationalist, empiricist, or we'll call a religious existentialist. He said existentialist, but I'm going to specify religious. So for the rationalists, God makes sense. So that was some of our thinkers who, maybe like Mordecai Kaplan, who would take an approach that would be more rationally acceptable. Or we also talked about Judaism and science and so forth. And then that's not as popular of a theology today, maybe because people usually approach theology in different ways than trying to use, proofs of God. And then the next one that we studied last time was the empiricist, or from my own experience, I sense God. Either the mystics, the people that talk about awe and wonder, like Rabbi Heschel, Abram Joshua Heschel, Reb Zalman, and so on. And then today we're going to look at the religious existentialists, which I call the ones who say, well, maybe God doesn't make sense. Maybe I don't always sense God, but my life makes sense because of what I'm going to call God, right? And a little, don't forget our little box for people that aren't sure they believe or maybe don't believe at the moment. So here's existentialism in a nutshell, which I did take straight off of Wikipedia because it was very concise. So existentialism is a kind of philosophy I think, and I know that we have a philosopher here right now. Larry's very knowledgeable about philosophy,
I
not a
would call
philosopher
myself a
himself,
philosopher.
a student of philosophy, a
Much better.
dedicated student of philosophy.
Okay.
So, I think existentialism has been associated with Europe and especially France, especially mid 20th century, and also post World War II, as people grapple with the absurdity of life, with the loss of traditional belief. But it happened before that, like 100 years or more ago, as some young philosophers kind of rejected more philosophy that was more abstract, right? That was more cognitive, and they wanted it to be more about authenticity and finding your own meaning, even in a world that can be frequently be absurd and unfair. That's my little nutshell there. That's without the religious component, just existentialism. So who would like to read us this little nutshell about what is existentialism?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Pamela.
Existentialism is a family of philosophical views and inquiry that explore the human individual struggle to lead an authentic life, despite the apparent absurdity or incomprehensibility of existence. In examining meaning, purpose, and value, existentialist thought often includes concepts such as existential crises, angst, courage, and freedom. Existentialism is associated with many 19th and 20th century European philosophies. Many existentialists consider traditional systematic or academic philosophies to be too abstract and removed from concrete human experience. A primary virtue in existentialist thought is authenticity. Existentialism would influence many disciplines outside of philosophy, including theology, drama, art, literature, and psychology. I just have to tell you, I have tickets to Keanu Reeves, who is on
Yes.
Broadway in October.
Okay.
I'm waiting for Godot.
Oh, well, okay, right. And that's a
Yes.
great existentialist drama. Do you want to tell people a little bit about that in case they're not familiar?
Sure. It is an absurdist play where someone is waiting for Godot who never shows up. So it's a whole kind of contemplation about things that haven't occurred or might occurred or whatever.
Okay.
Was that botched enough?
That's fine. Right. Just, yeah, the kind of like the meaning, and Godot may be a little reference to religion and God and the sense of it's not really there, right?
Yep.
Okay. So there's a lot of existentialism in 20th century art and drama, and so psychology. I mean, we've heard the expression an existential crisis. Sometimes we're not doing it. Gotta let some folks in. Hello. Okay. Okay. So, and would you read the last little bit there?
Sure. A central tenet of existentialism is that personal freedom, individual responsibility, and deliberate choice are essential to the pursuit of self-discovery and the determination of life's meaning.
Okay. So that's sort of the existentialism in a nutshell. And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with religion. In fact, it's often kind of atheistic because you would find a fundamental meaning in a belief in God, right? However, there were also some famous existentialists like Kierkegaard, who was a Lutheran and a Christian existentialist, who combined religion and existentialism. Like, you can't prove God, you can't prove meaning, you have to take a leap of faith. That's an expression. Apparently, he didn't use those very words, but it became associated with him. And you kind of surrender to God in a way. And this is in Christian existentialism, there's a lot of emphasis, like in Christianity, on grace and salvation and forgiveness of sin. But we'll see that in Judaism, there is a kind of existentialism in the 20th century. And I think it informed a lot of how we see Judaism. So what I did is I'm going to we'll see a little bit about what Jewish existentialism is. And then we'll look at a few thinkers who are very associated with it. ones that I think I can understand a little bit anyway. I'm not sure I understand all of them. And just a quote or two from them and talk about, what it might mean, because for some people, again, their belief in God has to be more rational. For others, it's, I just feel it. It's a mystical experience, awe, wonder. And for others, it's more of it's not such this being overwhelmed with this awesome wonder and beauty, but it's really like struggling and grappling and wrestling. And that's another way to find either God or godliness, right? There might be God as the verb and not the noun. But before we get into that, I just wanted to see if there's any questions that I can't answer, or or any thoughts about existentialism you studied in college. Has it meant anything to you in your life till now? Anybody?
Sure.
Okay, Larry?
Well, for me, the existentialist that I found most meaningful is Camus. Because Camus does not abstract anything. For Camus, it's how do people behave in real world situations, whether it's a plague or some other real world situation of the time that people confronted in wartime France or in other exigent circumstances. And
Right.
and
Don't do anything right now.
what's that?
No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So I just found Camus quite compatible with other ways of with the Jews, some of the people you're going to be talking about, and just somebody whose work I recommend. That's all.
Right. And was he okay? I'm mixing up my existentialist, so but was he an immigrant from North Africa?
Yes,
Or
yes.
yes.
Camus was from a Pied Noir, French North African family,
Okay.
and a
Right.
couple of his main stories are set
Just
in Algeria.
okay. And interestingly, I had just heard, as I told people on Friday night, I was listening to an interview with a great living rabbi, Yitz Greenberg, a modern Orthodox rabbi, and he was talking about Camus. He said that Camus was really an atheist, but when he fought with the partisans, he found that in fact some of the partisans were devout Catholics. And that's what motivated them. And then he found that some of his existentialist philosopher friends were collaborating with the Nazis. So and it went both ways. I mean, it didn't mean whether you were religious or not isn't what determined whether the person was good or bad, whether you're a philosopher. At least this is the way that Rabbi Greenberg explained it. So he really did come, as you said, to this conclusion. It's really how you behave that determines,
And
if you're an ethical person. Whatever motivates you works, right?
And he stands in contrast to his fellow existentialists, Jean-Paul Sartre, who, for all of his philosophizing, was a dedicated member of the very Stalinist French Communist Party.
Okay.
So,
well, this is also a perennial problem. Sometimes people, but we won't get into that. We got to go back to, yes.
I found existentialism when I was in college in the late 50s. Existentialism was all the rage. And
okay, I bet, yeah.
yeah, but I found it very attractive in the sense that it relied on you. It was a philosophy of freedom, of individual freedom, but the individual freedom was attached to responsibility. So it wasn't like,
Okay.
you could do anything you want. It was attached to responsibility, but it was like you're the master of your own fate
Okay.
and that I found as a very young college student, I found that very attractive, that I can control a lot more than I thought I could control. As I got older, I found that that's not wholly true, but
okay.
but it's very attractive. The whole idea
Yeah.
of existentialism,
Right.
Camus and Sartre and
Yeah.
all that, and
Simone de Beauvoir, let's, have a woman.
yeah, and, sitting in the
Okay.
Gil Margot in Paris and all that. It was it was also very romantic. There was a very romantic
Mhm. The
feeling.
lifestyle,
Yeah,
sitting in the
yeah, it was very
cafe,
romantic.
smoking. Yeah.
Yeah, smoking Galois, the whole
All right.
nine. So
So-
it was a very attractive philosophy.
Okay.
Anyway, but
Yes.
So I think,
Thank you.
I kind of got obsessed with Kierkegaard, who I
Okay.
think placed a barrier for me to joining any religion because of that leap of faith.
Yes.
That
Mm.
religion that belief was the thing that stayed Abraham's hand before he chopped off his son's head. And that just didn't, I
Or
couldn't
stab,
do it.
whatever, he slit his throat, whatever he was going to
Well,
do.
he
Yeah,
didn't-
but yeah, he didn't do it,
He didn't do it.
but he
And
was
it was
willing
that
to.
act, though, of I will do it, and then
Yeah.
having the faith that something was going to stop your hand, I could not get behind that. So I think it's only as I've gotten older, and I really liked existential, particularly Kierkegaard. I liked the either or ship, which is you can continue to say either or, but you're still plowing forward. I mean, it has done a lot. It's shaped a lot of my life, but it's certainly placed a barricade for me in religion, which is something as I've gotten older, I'm realizing it doesn't need to be that extreme.
Yeah, right. Well, we'll see that the Jewish existentialists are a little different. And in fact, once Rabbi Heschel, who we studied about last time, said that rather than a leap of faith, we take a leap of action. like the famous story of Nachshon, the man who jumps into the sea before the sea parts. That's one of the midrashim, that before the sea can part, someone has to kind of plunge into the water. And there is in the midrash such a person, who's mentioned in the Torah, Nachshon, the son of Aminadav. So he's courageously taking action through his faith, but it's oriented more towards his faith into kind of a blind obedience, But anyway, subtle things. If we had time, I actually had a little table that compares Jewish and Christian, but I don't know if we have time for that. But we're going to see some of the contrasts. Okay, so let's now look at Jewish existentialism, Jewish religious. So religious existentialism is, in fact, of course, different than secular. Got a little Grady grit there at Bombay Hook. And who would like to read to us about Jewish religious existentialism and a little the contrast to Christian? Yeah.
I'll read it.
Thank you. Thanks, Larry.
Yeah. Religious existentialism is a modern philosophical and theological approach that emphasizes the individual's personal struggle to find meaning, purpose, and authenticity in a world marked by uncertainty, freedom, and responsibility, all in relationship to the divine. It asks, how do I live a meaningful life before God in the face of doubt, suffering, and choice? In Jewish religious existentialism, the focus is often on covenant, encounter, moral responsibility, and human dignity, with an emphasis on living a life of value and depth, even when God's presence is hidden or ambiguous. Jewish existentialism is more communal, covenantal, and rooted in action and obligation. Christian existentialism is more individual, faith-centered, and focused on overcoming guilt through divine grace.
So kind of how Judaism and Christianity are different, right? That Judaism is more focused on community, covenant, obligation, whereas in Christian existentialism, my limited understanding, as in Christianity, there's a sense like we could never really keep all those commandments, but God, through God's grace, we're set right, we're forgiven. Whereas that's not usually the way we see it. We see it like, of course, God doesn't expect us to do everything perfect. We have to take action. We have to be God's partners, and then we can do tshuva, or repent, make amends for things that we might not have done right. But let's see some of the other themes of, also, well, I have a little chart to compare religious and secular, but maybe we'll come back to that because I don't want to get, too technical. If we have time, we can look at some of these charts that I found. Okay. But I think this kind of takes me back to my first class that I ever taught, online for for the whole Seaside community, when I came to do my interview here, and it was about Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. It was Sukkot. When you read the book of Ecclesiastes, who we might say, and I'm not alone in thinking this, was kind of like the first Jewish existentialist, even though if he's a historical figure and he's like Solomon or someone around then, it was like 3,000 years ago, right? But he had a lot of the same thoughts. The thoughts aren't new thoughts, just the label's new. So would somebody like to read us a couple of verses, 3 verses? The first one is from the beginning of Kohelet, and then another one just from the middle of Kohelet, and one from the end of Kohelet for Ecclesiastes in the Tanakh. Leslie Newman. You're still muted. Okay.
Empty breath, said Koheleth, utter emptiness. All is emptiness. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place from which they flow, the streams flow back again. Let us hear the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep God's mitzvot, for this is the whole of a person.
Thank you. The first verse, the classical thing is vanity of vanities, all is vanity. But I guess the meaning of vanity has changed a little over the years. So sometimes people use emptiness or, meaninglessness, but it really comes from like hevel, which is just sort of a breath out. And even the name of the first, Cain and Abel was really hevel. He had a very short life, and he's hevel. So the sense of life being sort of devoid of any fixed meaning or any objective meaning, because in the book of Kohelet, if you remember from us studying it over the years, Kohelet, who tradition identifies with King Solomon, says, oh, I had money and I had riches that didn't satisfy me. I see there's a lot of injustice in the world. I see that human beings aren't really greater than animals in a way. But he also says, you still have to do the right thing. You still have responsibility. Try to just enjoy the simple things in life, be a good person, keep God's mitzvot. It's like you have to sort of make your own meaning. In that sense, he's kind of a proto-existentialist. And I know he's popular with some of our congregants. I remember from when I was teaching about it. And another incident in the Torah, which I think links us to existentialism, and of course in a very kind of abstract way, is the story of Jacob. Our patriarch Jacob, when he was about to meet his brother Esau after a long time apart, and he's very afraid to meet his brother because he had cheated his brother years ago and tricked his brother years ago. So during the night, he's alone and he wrestles in the dark. He has like a dark night of the soul and wrestles with an angel, a representative from God. He emerges injured, but walking and with a new name. So the angel gives him a new name, Yisrael, the God wrestler. So here's some modern quotations about how we have to be God wrestlers. So who would like to read?
I can.
Thank you.
Okay. Yisrael means God wrestlers, those who struggle with God, not to defeat, but to engage. To be Jewish is to stay in the ring, to keep questioning, challenging, and holding fast to the relationship, even in the dark. It's Rabbi Arthur Wasco, Seasons of Our Joy.
Great.
In The Lonely Man of Faith, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik characterizes the religious life as marked by inner conflict, loneliness, and a sense of being touched by the infinite. The Jew may love God, may fight with God, but he may not ignore God. Elie Wiesel photo was
Elie Wiesel, the Nobel laureate and the concentration camp survivor. And he's like, you know, you could be angry. I think we have a reading like that in our high holiday prayer book in our machzor, or one that I brought. I think it's right there. It says, like, God says, you know, be angry at me, shout at me, fight with me, just don't look at the sky and go ho hum. I don't care if you're happy with me or mad at me, wrestle with me. Like God's saying, engage with me. And I think that's what Elie Wiesel was also saying. So I think that even though I can't say that our forefather Jacob was an existentialist, but that paradigm of wrestling with the divine, of struggling with the meaning of life, or struggling for the meaning of life, is a very Jewish one, right? It's not a sense of submission to God, even though maybe Abraham was at times, but it's very much of a struggle. And that's why Arthur Waskow had that great title of "We're God Wrestlers." That's part of what it means to be a Jew. So I think that Jewish existentialism is very focused on this sense of struggle. It's also focused, we'll see, on the relationships, whether the relationship is a loving embrace or a wrestling match. It's about what's between us. It's about action. It's not all about like, oh, I just got inspired. But, you know, it's I think something that could appeal a lot to many people. And maybe by the time we're done with this class, it will appeal to you too. So now we're going to look at some of these figures in Jewish existentialism. And we'll see some of the some quotations from them and a little bit of their philosophies. So let's go back to this. And the first one is going to be Martin Buber, who you might have read. And anybody, like, if you read Martin Buber, raise your hand, or you can do, right? You read him, we read in college. He was a German philosopher who later immigrated to Israel before the founding of the state. And he, you know, wrote in that great German philosophical way, so it's hard to understand him, but we understand the simplified version at least. So who would like to read about Martin Buber for us? Okay, Elaine, tell us about him.
Okay. A Jewish philosopher, theologian, and educator born in Vienna, Buber is best known for his existential and dialogical philosophy, especially articulated in his
Seminal work.
Work, And Thou.
I and Thou. I'm sorry, can you see it? Let me.
Okay.
Let me.
I and Thou.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. He emphasized the importance of genuine human relationships and encounter as the pathway to divine presence. Buber was deeply influenced by Hasidism, which he reinterpreted through existential categories.
Existential. That's the guys we're talking about. Existential.
Yeah. And he was also active in Zionist and educational efforts in both Europe and pre-state Israel.
So he was one of the only ones I'm talking about tonight who's not a rabbi, but he's a very famous philosopher and Jewish scholar. He helped to translate the Bible to German. And he had this whole philosophy called the Ich und Du, I and Thou, with the idea that, you know, many times in our lives, when we relate to other people or other creatures, it's a kind of I-it. It's me, I'm the center of everything. And other people are kind of more instrumental. It's not always even, we're not always aware. It's not always like scornful or callous. It's just kind of like you're rushing through a crowd. You're on the road. Look at, you know, are you thinking about all the other people, how they're feeling? You're thinking about how am I? Or, you know, in the grocery store, you're in line. How's that person acting? Do we really encounter that person? We often just go through our day, not always experiencing people. And same thing could be with, he writes about with a horse, with a tree, with an animal, or even a plant. And then there are times we have the Ich und Du. We have this I and Thou. And of course, in German, there was a Thou that's like I think that's the familiar, if people don't know German, of the you. And that would be like, I really see you. You. Not that the two of us are separate, but through your eyes, kind of through relating to you, that's the portal to relating to the eternal Thou, the big Thou, like God. If I could oversimplify simplify some things that he said. So let's look at a little bit of a text from him, and we'll have someone read that, and then we can talk about it a little bit. Okay. All right. So here we go from I and Thou, from this book, which you can get from the library. It's very easy to get a copy of, as translated to English by Walter Kaufman. Okay, Gabrielle, would you like to read that?
In every you, we address the eternal you. The extended lines of relations meet in the eternal you. Every single you is a glimpse of that eternal you.
So that you with a capital Y, it's like his thou, either one. Some, the old translations had thou and then they made it you. Okay. So I had both here. Keep going. Yeah.
The I-thou relation is not about using the other for our purposes, but about truly meeting the other in their fullness. It is through such genuine encounter that the eternal becomes present. This presence does not reside in one or the other, but in the space between, where dialogue and relation come alive. I and thou. Okay.
Yes. Continue. Well, it's from the book I and Thou.
Yeah, it's from the book. And then you're causing us. Do you find God through human relationships, and how?
So I think this is very influential again we'll see on a later thinker, Harold Schulweis, who was a Reconstructionist rabbi with a big congregation out in California. But he talked about the between. In fact, again, in another little prayer book, I have one that I've used for Shiva services. There's a poem about between, that the meaning we find is not up there, but unlike maybe the mystics and the empiricists, it's not necessarily just inside of me, but it's between us. That's where we find holiness. And doesn't that sound, Leslie, it sounds like the book we've all been reading, Sharon Browse's book, The Amen Effect, right? Yeah, what she talks about, I think she was also very influenced by this, this line of thought, this train of these rabbis who saw, and philosophers who saw the world this way, that you find the meaning in community and in individual one-on-one relationships, that you find meaning, and you could even find God there. You find, or godliness and holiness. And that's what I wanted to ask you, like, when you think of where God is, do you find God more by yourself or in relation to other people? If you want to share thoughts about that. Okay, Gabrielle.
I purposely read Martin Buber because I think I find God in relationships, and it's not that I meant to find God there. I find as I get older, the God that I used to believe as out there, I see it in every human, and it's so remarkable just to be walking down the street today, for an example, and there's a dog walker in our neighborhood, so a total stranger, and that was so interesting to look at that person and imagine their life. And by the time I left past him, I was so enriched by what I can only account as God.
Well, we do have in the Torah, in Genesis, it says everyone's made in Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And what does that, of course, that could have manifold meanings, with this idea that this consciousness, this awareness, this divinity is in each person. And that's also Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg was talking about, that every person is, the Talmud says, the Bible says, in the divine image. So that's a way to relate to God, is through other people. And amazingly, though, with Buber, it's also through nature, through a tree, through an animal. When you really encounter them, I'm sure many people can relate to that. Carol, did you want to say something?
Yeah. As a psychologist, that's good psychotherapy involves a close, intimate relationship where there's real respect, real caring, real tuning in to the other. That's how it works. But I did that for over 50 years.
Right.
But I never felt God during that. But I did develop close relationships with patients, and I think that they benefited.
Maybe, you know,
hopefully.
it's a stretch to say I felt God, but could you say I felt something sacred? I felt something holy. I felt something, you know,
I'm sorry, but
powerful.
no,
Okay.
I never felt that, but
Well, you can open yourself
to
up to
me,
you. It's not too late.
it was incredibly meaningful.
Well, that's good. So meaningful. It was a lot of
It
meaning.
was very
Yeah.
meaningful. And in general, I look people in the eye when I'm talking
Mhm.
with them. I mean, it can be just a casual waiting
Yeah.
online for you know, at the supermarket
Right.
or you know, the cashier or something or other. But I make a point of absolutely looking at somebody so that there's
Mhm.
a real
A
exchange,
connection, an
a
encounter, and
connection.
right.
Yes.
And this is like we were with Ron Wolfson. We were learning about relational Judaism and implementing that at the synagogue. That synagogues are chasing better programs and better management, but let's not forget that it's all based on relationships, and that's very much based on this idea, like the I and the thou, relate. You know, the between, and I think that's very much part of Jewish existentialism.
That's what you were emphasizing in the service on Saturday. In a way, the relationships within the
All right.
congregation and the caring and
Yes,
respect.
yes, talking about insiders and outsiders and how,
Right.
you know, you go
Yeah.
somewhere, sometimes you're an outsider. So also, when I first went to a Jewish Renewal Retreat Center, which was Elat Chaim, it's not really existing the same way as it did back then, but there's other retreat centers. The first thing I noticed, like you said, Carol, is that people were just like giving me this amazing eye contact and looking me in the eye, and I just felt really seen. That's part of, I think, the I thou experience. But I want to have time to look at some other people. We're just getting a little tiny like taste of a few important thinkers. And then I hope it will inspire you to read the books that I share, you know, that I suggested, or read other books that you can get from the library. You can order about other, you know, go deeper into their thought. Now, of course, consider the father of Jewish existentialism is Franz Rosenzweig. He was really a remarkable person who had a remarkable life, and he had an effect on Jewish, especially Jewish education. He created a program called the Lehrhaus. I don't think we wrote about this here, but the Lehrhaus was like really the first kind of modern Jewish education facility. It wasn't just for academics, it was for everybody, he said, to bring their own life experience into the study of Torah instead of just going to the Torah for all the wisdom, you know. And he had this kind of the new way of learning. But anyway, here's something about him and about his life. Would anybody like to read about Franz Rosenzweig?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Franz Rosenzweig was a German Jewish philosopher, theologian, and translator. He was raised in a secular, assimilated Jewish family and nearly converted to Christianity before a profound spiritual crisis led him back to Judaism. His seminal work, The Star of Redemption, outlines a dynamic theology grounded in the relationship between God, humanity, and the world, structured through the moments of creation, revelation, and redemption. Rosenzweig emphasized the lived experience, dialogue, and the centrality of community, moving away from abstract metaphysics toward a theology of encounter and responsibility. He also co-translated the Hebrew Bible into German with Martin Buber. Rosenzweig's dramatic personal story included serving in World War I and suffering from ALS, while continuing to teach with the help of his wife, even after he could no longer speak.
So, I mean, his story was pretty heroic, really. He continued teaching, and he, you know, he didn't have all the technology even that exists today. And he would like blink his eyes to let his wife sort of spell out words, and he just kept going. You can see he didn't live a very long life, but he still had a very big impact, partly through his life, you know, his rediscovery of Judaism as a modern secular person of his day. And there's also a dramatic story that as he was going to convert to Christianity, he said, I have to go through Judaism. So I'm going to go one more time to Yom Kippur and Kol Nidre. And while I was there, he had almost like a Jewish conversion back to Judaism experience. He was like won over by the power of Yom Kippur. So he, you know, he's considered really very important as a Jewish existentialist, we could say. So here's a little bit of his view of, again, about relationships and encounter and a new meaning of revelation. So does anybody else want to read? Maybe who hasn't had a chance to read? If you do, jump in and read. Otherwise, someone who has read and just likes to read can read. There's more
I
to
can
come.
I can read.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Carol. Okay.
Franz Rosenzweig, Revelation as Encounter. We do not learn about God as a distant idea. We encounter God as a voice that speaks to us. Revelation is not information. It is transformation. It does not say this is what God is, but rather, here I am for you. It is the moment when the soul awakens to being addressed. In that moment, I am no longer just a self. I become a you in the eyes of the eternal. Faith begins not in a doctrine, but in relationship. Revelation is nothing but a turning of God toward the soul. The soul experiences itself as summoned, as spoken to, and loved.
So again, I think that's really beautiful and kind of hard to understand a little bit. Like, how do like Abraham, God called him, but how do modern people feel being called? And I think he's saying, like, maybe being in the presence, feeling transformed. He went into that synagogue, and like people might come, have an unexpected experience that makes them feel called or loved. But I do see the between the revelation, the love, which is associated in Jewish tradition with love is associated with revelation. Like when we have the prayer Ahavat Olam or Ahava Rabbah, it's about love and revelation at the same time. It's like knowing the divine is through, like, we love God and God is teaching us. It's always intermeshed in Judaism, if I'm making sense. I didn't really put a question with that, but I just thought it was important to include him because he's a very important thinker. I had some things about Joseph Soloveitchik, who was the founder of modern Orthodoxy, and they still call him the Rav. He was their greatest rabbi, 20th century rabbi, and he's also considered kind of an existential Jewish thinker, even though he's Orthodox, but time just doesn't permit to do everything. I wanted to make sure we had at least one. We've got Pamela has a dance piece, Alvin Ailey's Revelations. Okay, make sure to, we'll have to make sure to see that.
Quick.
Thank you for sharing that. So how about, anything else you want to say about revelation and relation? Yes.
One of the most interesting things, just very briefly, about Rosenzweig and Buber,
Yeah.
that their existentialism and their philosophy in general led them to very different positions on Zionism. Mentioned in the slide that Buber was a Zionist and lived in Israel.
Yeah.
Rosenzweig, in fact, believes political Zionism, was a bad idea because it would put the Jews into history and make them in a very ordinary way, and diminish what made the Jews unique. Buber his existentialism and respect for relationships, I think, with all people led him towards a current of Zionism that, if it still exists, it's very hard to find, which is kind of a cultural educational Zionism. And he was very skeptical of militant Jewish nationalism, and that included the revisionist version and the socialist version. So I find it interesting how their commitments even though they were collaborators, it led them to very different views on Zionism and a departure from what is now considered mainstream Zionism.
Thank you. That's really great. I know that Buber belonged to a group, I can't think of the name of the group, where they wanted to have a binational state. Was that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Following on ideas loosely of Achad Ha'am, and Buber took that further.
Well,
it lost that current.
It did lose, but as
a political matter.
It's pre-Holocaust.
the Holocaust happened, Israel's born,
That's
and
right.
it, of course, is nationalist, you know, and then it's been through many different changes, but that's another class, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, important to know, but I wanted to make sure we had at least one woman who is a Jewish existentialist, because I realized a lot of these classes I took in college and so on, you know, would be more about only men who were noted theologians. So here's Rachel Adler, a living Reform rabbi, but she grew up Orthodox. Somebody want to read about her?
You want to read?
Sure.
That's right. Woman should read it.
Okay, go for it.
Me?
Sure, go ahead, Elsie.
Okay. Yeah, a pioneering feminist theologian and scholar, Rabbi Rachel Adler is one of the first women to integrate feminist critique with traditional Jewish texts and theology. Originally raised in Orthodoxy and later ordained in the Reform movement, she teaches at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Los Angeles. Her groundbreaking book, Engendering Judaism, reimagines covenant, halakha,
Jewish law, yeah.
halakha and theology through a feminist existential lens, calling for inclusive, justice-centered community and practice.
Thank you. And
Well, that's very
you know,
refreshing.
my first encounter with her was in the Jewish catalog. If people remember that wonderful book, it became a series of 3 books. It was kind of like the Whole Earth catalog for Jews back in the 70s.
That's stressful.
Hippie Judaism. And be sure to mute if you're not speaking things. So at any rate, she wrote about the mikvah in this very modern way that made it very appealing to modern women. But then I heard that she kind of recanted what she'd written because she became more of a feminist and didn't, she thought she'd been sort of writing apologetics, but really the work that she wrote about the mikvah influenced a lot of women to find new meaning in the mikvah and embrace that. But here's something she writes about covenant, gender and repair, and a little kind of her feminist existential view. She's kind of the Simone de Beauvoir, I guess, of the Jewish existentialists. So who would like to read this for us? Okay, Elaine. Okay.
Okay. A new Jewish theology must arise from within the brokenness of inherited roles and the yearning for wholeness. God is not a distant legislator, but a partner in the work of tikkun, of healing. Covenant is no longer about male lineage and power, but about mutuality, justice, and compassion. When we act with care, when we resist domination, when we mend what has been torn, there is God. The divine is revealed not above us, but among us in every ethical encounter.
And then we can just, yes.
Okay. Oh, yeah. What changes when we use language like God being above, inside, or among us?
So again, we're coming back to this idea of where is God? Is there a hierarchy between, inside, among? And we've noted that even in the Torah, when it talks about, God says, "V'asuli mikdash v'shechanti b'tocham," make me a sanctuary so I'll dwell in their midst, right? It within them, and not like I'll dwell in it, you know, that in the maybe even the very act of building something together helped godliness to dwell among people. So I think it's very just this wording is very representative of this kind of reconstructionist. There's a new one side of reconstructionism, you know, we saw the rationalist side, but there's also this existentialist side, godliness, relationship. We'll see about the wrestling when we're about to get to kind of my favorite Jewish existentialists before we finish. But any thought about, have you changed your idea of like, where's God located? You know, through either just thinking about it in this class or as time has gone by? When
Well, I think through the process of converting, I mean, I think even before I got to the point where I could take that series of classes, I really believed that God was that essence that exists in his life. So it, by thinking of it that way, you get out of a hierarchical way where you cannot challenge those above. Instead, it's all within.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, the within and the between, that's between means here's something that, oh, I didn't think of this before teaching tonight, but see, when I'm teaching with you, between us, I get new ideas, right? So when I was studying for my, I was studying at graduate school, I was working on my PhD with in literature. I took a class up, like, it was like a private class with a professor that we arranged on literary theory. So it was about, in literary theory, there's these concepts of where is the meaning in the text. Is it in the head of the person that wrote the text? Like whatever they wanted to mean is what it means? Or is it in the words itself? Or is it in the reader looking at the words? Do they decide what the meaning is? Because this is all sort of how people look at literature, in the academy. And I said, aha, in Judaism, the meaning is like between us in partnership and community, because how do you study a Jewish text? You don't, yeah, you can study by yourself, but usually you have a chavruta, right? You have a study partner. And even if they didn't always call it chavruta, you had somebody to learn with, because that's where you generate meaning, with arguing about it and with wrestling with it and with, right? Looking at different sides, and between you, then you find the meaning. Or even in a group, as you're studying in a class or in a community or at shul when we're having our discussions, that's where you find meaning, right? It's generated among and between us. Yeah. So I think that's part of Judaism in general, and certainly part of this strand of Judaism. That's very important. Okay, well, now I'd like to, thanks for helping me think of that. I'd like to look at, I guess you could say, my favorite Jewish existentialist, because I heard him when I was like 18 years old. I was at the University of Texas, and we got to go to the Jewish Federation General Assembly in Dallas. And of course, the keynote speaker was Golda Meir, one of her last appearances in the US, and we were all in Israel the next year, all the students. And that was way before Birthright, you made your own arrangements to go to Israel, as you all know. But another person who I heard that influenced me for life was Harold Schulweis, Rabbi Harold Schulweis. We'll read about him, because I took little notes from his talk that I treasured, the little scribbles that I wrote for years. And then years later, as a rabbi, I got to hear him again. He lived a long life. So let's read a little bit about him. And then, since he's special, I have 2 quotes from him. So that'll help us wrap up the class today. So let's go. And Harold Schulweis. Okay. Who would like to read? Maybe I'll read about him, since we're getting towards the end here. So Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis, 1925 to 2014, a leading figure in conservative and Reconstructionist Judaism, Schulweis served for decades as the rabbi of Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California. Now, it was a big synagogue, and the way he made it personal for people is that he created, like, in synagogue chavurot, so that people would have their own small group and they would have these relationships between them. He was a theologian, ethicist, and a social activist who championed a theology of predicate, called predicate theology, focusing on godliness in human action rather than some metaphysical speculation about a God, up in heaven or something. He emphasized conscience, moral courage, and human responsibility to bring holiness into the world through ethical living. He championed inclusivity and relational Judaism. He was reaching out to gay Jews, to intermarried Jews, long before it was mainstream. He helped to found an organization to help to feed the hungry, Mazon, and another one that supported righteous Gentiles who were living in poverty, even though they had saved Jews during the Holocaust. So he had a big influence on me, and just a very kind, just look at that kind face. Okay, here's a couple of sayings from Harold Schulweis. Somebody want to read this one? Godliness as existential aspiration. 1990. Anybody want to
I'll
read?
read it.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, godliness is not confined to heaven. It is a quality of being that is accessible to us in compassion, in justice, in creativity, in conscience. The question is not only do you believe in God, but do you believe in godliness? That is, do you believe that kindness matters, that truth matters, that there is a sacred core to being human? We are summoned not just to worship God, but to imitate God, to bring divinity into the world through our lives. That is the existentialist challenge of faith, to live in such a way that the holy becomes visible through us.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, just reading this, think about this, that kindness matters and truth matters, and there's a sacred core to being human. I think so many of these things are being challenged in our modern world. But let me go to the next text from him, because I have another one from him, and then we can discuss them as we're wrapping up. Making meaning. So here's something he wrote about making meaning. Who would like to read this one? Our lives cry out for purpose. Peter, thank you.
Our lives cry out for purpose. Faith is not about escaping the world, but sanctifying it. Religion is not an exit from life, but a deeper entry into it. In the face of absurdity, the Jewish tradition dares to say, create meaning, not find it as if it were hidden under a rock, but make it through mitzvah, through kindness, through the conscious shaping of a life of value. To be religious is to live responsibly, not resignedly. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
That's
So,
essentially.
yeah, I mean, there's so much maybe we should have a whole class just on Harold Schulweis. I just love him so much. He talked a lot about sanctifying life and this whole idea of godliness, kindness, truth, making God visible through our lives, right? Your hands are the hands of God. You're the partners with God. Creating meaning, I think that's so important. That is really, I guess that's what existentialism is about. And religiously, making meaning, but we have all these tools of our heritage, of our Torah, of community to make meaning. I'm thinking about, when the pandemic started, if we want to think about that, people looked for meaning. People tried to right away think of reasons and meaning. And we know in our own personal life, we try to make meaning of what happens. And ultimately we have to kind of make our own meanings. I mean, we don't have to just invent them out of thin air, but he's like saying, right, we have to make meaning, like we make Shabbat, we make a mitzvah, we decide. And if you try to tell someone else what the meaning should be to them, that's chutzpah, But for the person who's going through something, they often find their own meaning. I find this very much as a rabbi, that, people create their own meaning, find and make their own meaning. And there's not just one right way, I would say, in this modern way of viewing Judaism. So any thoughts about this little taste of Harold Schulweis and, godliness versus God and making meaning as a priority? Yes, Larry. And then Leslie.
Thank you for that. He's not someone I was familiar with before, and thank you. I
Good.
want to follow up. Does he explicitly address the problem of making meaning in terms of theodicy, in terms of meaning after the Holocaust,
Right.
or meaning after tragedy?
Good question. That's good. Well, guess what? That's the topic of our next class.
Oh, okay.
Kind of saved the best for last. It's, how do modern Jews grapple with theodicy, like all the bad things that happen to good people? So I'll go back and look at some of the writing. It's not the thing that stood out for me the most. It was more like he's not trying to say why something happened, but maybe when things happen, how we create meaning and support and kindness and compassion, but I'll see if he has
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we will, that's our focus next time.
Yeah, I think I think you
Oh,
should.
wait,
I'll go ahead,
Leslie
Leslie,
Newman
go
was going to
ahead.
speak. Yeah.
I was
Okay.
just going to say that I find godliness much more approachable than God, in terms of
Yeah.
relating and understanding, and what I believe are the basic tenets of Judaism that have always given me perspective and pride in my
Mhm.
religion. But I do love that godliness. I mean, I immediately related to it.
Oh, good. Good. I
Thank
remember
you.
one, thank you. I remember using the word divinity, as a way to talk about God, and someone said, "Is your rabbi an atheist?" That was in New York, but okay. But yeah, godliness, right? And this predicate theology. And that's very Reconstructionist too, right? God is a verb. God, you've got the Newmans know a lot about Reconstructionism, so they're very involved with it. And I think that's very relatable and more, that was something that makes more sense for modern people, or at least like last time we did have the question, well, I have those awesome experiences, but do I have to call it God? And Reb Zalman said, God, oh, what a word. Like, it is a term so laden with all kinds of antiquated beliefs and hierarchies and so on that, we may shy away from it. So maybe it's just redefining God. Maybe you don't have to use God. You could say the mystery, the godliness, whatever, or you could say maybe God will have a new meaning this week, next week. And last word, I guess, Stan, do you want to
Well, I just
say
wanted to
something?
say you said something that I thought was very meaningful, and
Yes.
I think it's something I never really thought about, which is that Judaism gives you the tools to create meaning. I really love
I
that.
think so.
I love that concept. I never heard that before, and I thank you for it.
Thank you. I think with the study of Torah, right, it's really about making meaning. I mean, really authentic. I mean, of course, for some people it's academic, for some people it's halakha, but I think it's most beautiful when it's about like finding some meaning in it, bringing, like Franz Rosenzweig would say, bringing your life to it, and then having this encounter, this I thou with the text itself. Or actually, I heard from my Zohar teacher, Malila Hellner Eshid from Jerusalem, that the Zohar paints our relationship to Torah studies kind of a love affair in which we're courting and we're having a relationship and we are learning. And again, so all these are ideas of Jewish existentialism: encounter, relationship, I thou, godliness, predicate theology. We had some making your own meaning, wrestling, struggling, but ultimately finding meaning. And I think it's something that can have a big role. And we may not always just have one of the choices I gave. You might be rational, empirical, or existential, but there's so many more options than just whatever traditional thing you thought as a kid. And Gabrielle, did you want to say something?
You sparked when you said, or I guess actually the concept of being given tools. Would our senses, so sight, sound, smell, we take in God perhaps. Would a sense be memory in the Jewish religion? And the reason is your concept of tools, given tools, realize memory.
Yeah.
It's very much stressed in this religion.
I think so. I think we're Ashreinu Matov Chalkenu Manaim Gorleinu. How happy are we? How good is our lot, right? And our portion, right? And our destiny as Jews, and because of all these things that are part of our inheritance, that is not and that was very much what attracted me. What Harold Schulweis said, that because I was, young and feeling secularism was like empty and superficial, and I wanted to find a deeper, more authentic, again, authenticity and authentic way of living. But it's this sense of, we have these memories, we have this community, we have a history, and also in our sources and the words, the concepts in Hebrew, the multifaceted meaning, those can all help us. They don't just give us the meaning that we have to take from the past, but they're like building blocks, I think, that we can use to make our meaning. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming out this evening. I'm going to turn off the recording, and Anything else? You can stick around for a minute, but